We're very excited to be here this evening to share some of the feedback we received through the community engagement process for West Pinehurst Community Park, and also share the concepts that we developed. Quick introductions. My name is Rachel Cotter. I am a landscape architect and park planner with McAdams, and we have been under contract with the village to provide the consulting services for development of the park master plan for West Pinehurst Community Park. And with me tonight is Julie Young, who is also a landscape architect, and Sonia Shaw, who is our park planning and equity specialist, and Jen Beadle, who is also a park planner with McAdams. So in terms of what we'll be covering this evening, we wanted to share with you where we are in the overall park planning process, then discuss a little bit about what we heard through the public input process, both in the previous public input meeting and also through the online public opinion survey. We also will be presenting two concept plans, fairly similar with some minor differences, but that is the point where we will be asking some very strategic asset-based questions for you to provide some feedback on. And then we'll share some precedent imagery. I think two-dimensional maps can be challenging to read or to understand, so we can share what the look and the feel of the park is going to be. We have collected some precedent imagery to share with you. And then finally, we'll be discussing next steps and any questions or comments that the public might have. Next slide. So this is a typical park planning process. It's about 6 months, and it starts with a robust inventory and analysis. And the design team spends a lot of time collecting data and information, both on the physical, environmental, and regulatory conditions of the existing site as it stands today. And then we also go through a community engagement process, which for this project included 2 public input meetings. This is the second of those, and an online public input survey. We've also received some feedback from the town and had some conversations with staff about participation rates and what some of their needs are as a department. Once we've gathered all this information from the community and on the site, we're in a position to develop concept plan alternatives, and that's what we'll be sharing with you this evening. Once we receive feedback, both from the community, staff, the administration, managers, and other stakeholders, we will be refining one concept plan to use as the basis for the master plan adoption by the village council. Next slide. So in summary, there's a lot that goes into developing a concept plan for a given park. Some of the information that we consider as a design team include the site opportunities and constraints. So we're looking for what the site offers, what the site can bear, what's appropriate for the site, what the constraints might be from a infrastructure or environmental or physical perspective. We also want to consider input from the public and other stakeholders, which is the reason for some of these public input and the public opinion survey. You will be the users of the park, and this is a design process that we move through together. So your input is incredibly important, and we hope that through this slideshow and the presentation we're giving, we will demonstrate that we did listen to the results of the community input as we develop these park master plans. We'll also be and have reviewed relevant village plans, such as the overall village comprehensive plan, the previously completed Parks and Recreation master plan. There's a number of recommendations in both of those that inform some of the design decisions that we've made. And then finally, we have looked at the participation rates that Parks and Recreation staff have provided So we are ensuring that we are accommodating the programmatic needs and demands across the community. One thing to keep in mind as we move into sharing some of the results of the public input is that the public input was not considered statistically valid, meaning we did not reach out to a random sample of folks to reply. So people could self-select their type of input and the frequency of input. So we did notice that there were many voices for certain aspects that might have been a little bit louder or, care deeply about certain aspects of the park. And so we do take that into consideration when we're reviewing the community engagement results. And I will turn it over to Jen to discuss what those were with you.
Thanks, Rachel. So in terms of our public input approach, we had 2 public meetings and also gave folks the opportunity to participate in a questionnaire. So the first thing that I'll talk about is how the virtual public meetings were set up. They were set up quite similar to what we're doing now, where we were on Zoom and we used a polling app to gain some information about who was in the room and how they've interacted with West Pinehurst Community Park in the past and currently. So what we found from those polls was that participants' average age was 39, and the majority of folks that attended that meeting reported being residents of Pinehurst. The majority of the participants have visited the park in the past, and what they did at the park includes they most frequently brought their dog, they walked and ran, they played disc golf, used the open field for an activity, and they gathered with others and exercised. During that meeting, we also had we had a virtual whiteboard available where participants would use virtual sticky notes and type in what they would like to see out at the park. So the results from that, we counted how many times the various amenities were included on those sticky notes. And so the most frequently requested item for out at West Pinehurst Community Park was a skate park, followed by nature-related amenities, playground, dog park, and mountain bike trails. Next slide, please. All right, and we also created a public opinion survey, and that survey went out, I believe that was the second week in May, and it was available to the public for 2 weeks. It was promoted through the Village's Engage Pinehurst website and also through the Village's Parks and Rec Facebook page. And they did a really, really good job of advertising it because we got close to 800 responses, which is abnormal. It's an abnormally large amount. So it was good to see that people were interested in participating in this public input process. So key findings from that survey: the majority of people reported being Pinehurst residents. 29% were non-residents. The majority were participants were white, followed by Hispanic, Latino, African American, Black, Asian Pacific Islander, American Indian, or Alaskan Native. The majority of folks have visited the park, and interesting that, almost close to half of the people that participated in the survey had not ever been out to the park. And some notable comments on themes that came out of some of the open-ended questions that we gathered: that there was overwhelming concern that a sense of place will be disrupted if active recreation facilities such as the skate park or athletic fields are developed. We also saw that there's a strong desire to take advantage of the natural beauty of the existing park conditions, and there's a need for facilities that support teen programming, such as a skate park. Next slide. So as Rachel said in the beginning, when she was talking about our agenda and what we considered in developing the concept that will be presented next, we took a look at relevant existing plans, one of which was the village's 2011 Comprehensive Parks and Rec Plan, the village's overall comprehensive plan. And we took into consideration data that was provided to us by the village that looked at participation numbers in their various athletic activities. And so what we found that was recommended in the 2011 Parks and Recreation Comp Plan was that there's a need, it recommended athletic facilities out at that park as well as a dog park, a walking trail, and what else was it? Walking trail, and to maintain the disc golf, because the disc golf was really, a very popular activity. The village's 2019 comprehensive plan recommended athletic fields out at the park to support demand for programs. And we ran the numbers that the Village Parks and Recreation Department provided to us, and we saw that demand has grown almost exponentially year by year. Next slide. Now we'll turn it over to Julie.
Thanks, Jen. We take all the information from the public involvement and from the comp plans and the needs coming from the village and their programming, and we pull that together, and we have created a park concept. The concept statement for what we have is a traditional park concept that provides active play opportunities along the exterior of the site. There are no impacts to the disc golf course, and the area around the existing pond is passive in nature, allowing users to connect with nature on soft trails and overlooks to the existing pond. Below the concept statement, you'll see there's a list of the program elements that are included on the park plan that we are going to present next on a map. If you look through that list carefully, you'll see that skate park has been left off, although it was in one of the higher ranked or most wanted amenities. And I'll let Mark speak to that briefly before I jump into the actual plan itself.
Thank you, Julie. As we discussed this morning in our meeting with the folks who were here in attendance, we do not have a skate park being shown right now as program elements for West Pinehurst Community Park. The reason for that is we just didn't feel like this was the right property for that, and that was based on some of the feedback we received. But it was clear that there is a definite interest in that type of facility in the area. What we feel like is that is a skate park facility is probably more of a county-wide need versus just a Pinehurst need. So we are talking with the Tri-Cities group, which consists of managers and council members from Pinehurst, Southern Pines, and Aberdeen. And we are likely going to talk to that group because they've been looking for collaborative opportunities between the towns where we can share facilities, we can share costs. We think that that approach is probably better for a skate park because it's going to serve more customers than just Pinehurst residents. So we are going to explore that opportunity and see if there's a possibility of an agreement and a collaborative effort that could come together for that. If we decide to do one in Pinehurst, it may be that Wicker Park is the better site for that versus West Pinehurst. We already have the inline skating rink. We could come off the edge of that and create a skate park to the south of that facility. There's also available land north of the tennis courts at Wicker Park. This would be centrally located, accessible via sidewalks from neighboring communities, neighborhoods, downtown. So we think that there's benefits for both of those options depending on which route we go. So a skate park, just because it's not being shown in West Pinehurst Park, does not mean that it's not going to happen at another location. We just feel that there's better locations for it than out at West Pinehurst.
Thanks, Mark. We'll go ahead and switch over to the concept map, and I'll briefly walk through how the amenities are worked into the site. We'll start along Chicken Plant Road and the entrance there. We've increased the parking to accommodate parking for 2 flex fields. Flex fields are essentially a 300-foot baseball field that provides flexibility in the outfield for other athletic needs such as soccer. So there's the ability to offer more programming with that type of field. Surrounding that area are paved paths shown in the yellow dashed line. Along there, there's a shelter, and the path goes through wooded areas and along the natural areas. And then as you move south along Bowman Road, there's an additional soccer field or athletic field that could be multi-purpose in nature. And then further south of that, there's a secondary parking lot that's accessed off of Bowman Road. Concentrated in this area, there is a shelter and restroom facility in close proximity to a splash pad, playground, open lawn, an outdoor classroom and amphitheater, and along with the dog park. That active part of the site is balanced by the natural part of the site, the wooded area where the existing disc golf course is. Through that area, we propose some soft hiking trails so that users can get in touch with the nature and the beautiful aspects of the site. With the existing pond, you could build a shelter in closer proximity to that with some potential pond overlooks that can be used to enjoy that section of the site. Some improvements will probably need to be made to repair or improve the existing dam. There hasn't been a detailed inventory or done of the dam, but it would need to be improved in order for the existing pond to remain a viable portion of the site. So that's a brief overview of the plan, the concept plan itself. And now we'll go ahead and move into some questions and try to get some input from you all on your impressions.
So we're gonna use a series of asset-based questions to get your feedback on these park plans. So the first one is, what about this park concept will make your community a better place? So, and we do have a question, Julie, about the concept itself. A couple concepts or a couple questions about the concept. So if you could go ahead and answer those. And while Julie's answering those, if the rest of the group could answer the first question in the chat.
There was a question regarding the brownish, maybe orangish area along the stream that's along the sort of southeastern property line. That designates an area as a wetland. There are low-lying areas that tend to hold water. That's the designation for that area down there. You're welcome. Some things we noted during our site walk is there are some sort of half logs that help the users of the disc golf course to navigate through some of those low-lying areas when they're going from between, I think it's hole 15 and 16.
A couple of questions coming in on the active side. One is, will there be a tennis court?
There is no tennis court currently shown on the concept plan. I don't know, Jen, did we get any input, any feedback on tennis courts during the surveying?
2 or 3 out of, like I said, well, we actually provided folks with a list of 26 items that they could select as far as what they would like to see out there. And tennis was one of the lowest ranked.
The next comment, that's a lot of fields, which would require a lot of light. This will affect the rural tranquility of the area. Mark, did you want to comment on the lighting, thoughts about lighting in this area?
Yeah, we briefly touched on this morning, but with the new technology that's out there for LED field lighting, you can really focus the light on the area that you want to have lit, and with very minimal spillover. We actually have an example of that if that could get posted in chat possibly, or is Dave going to share his screen, we can show you some examples of what that could look like, out there on the site if we're just trying to focus on lighting the athletic fields only, which would be the intent, because, you know, we do want to be cognizant of aware of our neighbors and not have a lot of light spillage that's going to impact those adjacent properties. So if you click that link that's posted in chat, that will take you to Musco's project page to where you can see some examples. And I'll do that myself right now. And I believe when that page shows up on the very bottom right, obviously there's other examples there, but if you look at the Sterlington Sports Complex on the bottom right, that kind of gives you an idea of the type of lighting plan that we would be interested in for the athletic fields, so that we can just put light where we have the active recreation with very minimal spillover. And I see Jane's question about keeping a broad screen along Bowman Road and pulling the fields away from the road. When we get to our next concept, Jane, those fields have been shifted a little bit to the south away from that road. I can't remember the exact buffer, Rachel or Julie, that y'all had there, but that did provide some additional buffer between the fields and the road.
Yeah, and we can go over kind of to understand better the scale of the park and what it's shown and drawn as. It's 100 scale, which means 1 inch equals 100 feet. The plan that the first concept we've shared with you, the buffer is 50 foot at its narrowest. So it just gives you an idea. It looks like it's closer to the road than maybe it is, but that's a 50-foot buffer we've retained for that first concept.
And I'll flip right back to the concept maps. Mark, which lighting project were we referencing? Did you want to highlight here on the lighting question?
I'm on mute, sorry. The Sterlington Sports Complex at the bottom right was the one that jumped out to Dave and I as we were looking at their projects. All of them really show how those are focused on the athletic fields themselves versus, you know, lighting up the surrounding areas. But that was one of the ones that jumped out to us. And that would be the type of lighting that we would want for those fields.
Yeah, it's just one of many examples that are out there that we thought would be relevant for tonight's presentation, but it just kind of gives you an idea of, as kind of piggybacking on what Mark said, that you can almost have 0-foot candles at the edge of the ball field fences. So that with the technology these days and the fixtures that they have in place now, you get very little light pollution, whether it's up above the fields, above the lights, or through various property lines. So.
All right, well, if we want to return back to our concepts here and continue with some of our asset-based questions. Do we see, let's see, it looks like we still need to get some feedback on what about this park concept will make your community a better place? Anything? So if this park weren't built, the quality of the community asset would be the same. The trail and playground seem nice and inviting. Okay. Anything else about the concept that would make the community a better place? More concerns about the lighting. Right, well, we have some other opportunities to share your concerns, so we'll move on to the next question. What else could increase this park's positive impact on your community? So if you could change anything about the plan, if you could add something, take it away. We've already heard about lighting. So we have one comment, perspective that the park isn't going to make the community a better place. It would make it better if we would keep the park more rural with less flex fields. So there's a question about the need for 3 additional fields for the community. And I'm wondering from a participation perspective, Dave and Mark, if you could speak to that a little bit.
I can touch on the number of hours that we've been, that we currently use the fields. So currently now we have Cannon Park ball field number 1, number 2, kind of the multi-purpose areas, what we call the little section of green space outside of the ball field number 1's temporary fence. And we also use the mile track and the half-mile track down at the harness track. Use the infields, I'm sorry. In calendar year 2020, we used approximately 1,907 hours for those ball fields. In calendar year 2021, as of May 2021, we used 2,761.75 hours. So we increased almost 855 hours from 2020 to May of 2021 calendar years. So you can see it's a significant increase of use throughout our various fields, which frankly, the infields of the mile track are not appropriate for active athletic recreation, but we make it work. But yeah, from 2020, a little over 1,900 hours to 2021, actually only 5 months of 2021, 2,761.75 hours. So significant increase of use.
And Dave, how does that translate into the number of fields? You have such an increase. Is there a demand that you can't fulfill or support because of space shortages?
Space shortage, yes. And also 3 out of the 5 do not have lights. So for a good portion of the winter months that we have activities, we are unable to use those fields because they don't have lights. So that essentially gives us only 2 fields, basically once time changes, that we can utilize for all of our active recreation.
So the number of fields was very much based on the demand for athletic fields, both soccer and baseball, softball, but also what we're seeing as an industry in terms of trends and growing sports like lacrosse and football across communities as well.
Yeah, so we use the fields for soccer, lacrosse, flag football, baseball, softball. Sometimes we have 3 coach pitch teams on the infield and a flag football team there are 2 flag football teams in the outfield. So we are utilizing what we have. We're kind of crammed in. So those bookings and those hours, it could be multiple teams, multiple activities on those fields as well.
All right, well, I want to keep the meeting moving here. We did have one questions about putting lights on existing fields. Dave or Mark, I'm not sure if you want to speak to that question or.
Well, I'm sorry, Marty, if you want to jump in.
Go ahead, you got it.
Well, we have, as I mentioned, we're using 5 facilities right now, 5 fields. We have Cannon Park number 1, which has lights. Cannon Park number 2 that has lights. And that's all we have lights currently on our those ball fields. We use the infield of the half mile and the mile track. And we use a little grassy area at Cannon Park that we call a multi-purpose field. Those 3 locations do not have lights. We have budgeted for lights at Rassy Wicker Park, where the Pinehurst Elementary School's temporary campus is located currently. Once they move off property, we get the grounds back in shape. We're planning to light that soccer or multi-purpose rectangular field. So we don't have a lot of fields actually that are lit or a lot of available fields in general to use.
So I know there's a number of other questions in the chat. We do have a question and answer session at the end of the presentation. So we're going to keep moving here to our third question. What about this concept will the park be known for? So this might be a little more of a difficult question to answer, but we're really looking for what about the park is going to make this space special. So it might be something that you currently know about the park. It might be something that you see in the concept that sparked an idea about how this park could be memorable. But we want to develop a concept with some theming around what's really going to make people say, I want to go back to that park and do that special thing, or I want to go back to the park because it had this, or remember that blah 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 park, that was so much fun. So we've received quite a few comments about it being rural and peaceful. Okay, so people say that now. So if we're thinking about the proposed concept, are there any comments or thoughts about how the concept will help make this park memorable? Okay, few comments on the longleaf pine stands. So I think these are all great comments for the next question as well. What about this concept threatens the park as a community asset the most? And from what I've heard, we're seeing lots of comments about threatening the rural character of the park, threatening how quiet and peaceful it is, some of the wildlife habitat that's there, both flora and fauna. Too much development. Okay. The splash pad. Well, we did get some preliminary feedback from staff and wanted to share the next concept with you because there are some refinements that will address some of the concerns you all have. Julie, I'll let you talk about what those are.
Yeah, speaking of splash pad, the updates we made to this concept remove the splash pad, remove the outdoor classroom. It increased the buffer to 75 foot, 75 to 100 foot along Bowman Road. Added stormwater control measure, which was added where the dog park was. So it's relocated the dog park. It's relocated the playground to a more centrally located part of the park and added a second restroom facility with a shelter. We can go ahead and share that concept. Again, it's going to look pretty similar to the first one. Those fields have shifted back to take more advantage of the open areas that exist on site and preserve more of the trees that are along the perimeter. And again, it kind of reduces the amount of activity to create more of a less active, less developed area, if you will.
All right, so we have a few more asset-based questions to go along with this concept. The first is, does removal of the splash pad and outdoor classroom and amphitheater improve the park concept as a community asset? Okay, so a couple of responses about yes, this would improve the park as a community asset. Julie, do you want to answer the quick question about a wildflower meadow?
So the intent for the wildflower meadow is to improve the areas that are open and currently don't have a lot of trees. The intent there is to introduce some native grasses and species that would introduce wildlife to the portions of the site to balance the nature with the park activities. So the idea is it's a more planted, managed portion of the site that's improved from what it is today. I know that there was comments on the last meeting about what do they call those pricklies that get stuck in your socks? Sand spikes or
Sand spurs.
Sand spurs, thank you. It would be improving the quality of the open grass areas.
So I think there was also a question about an inventory of flora and fauna, and we didn't do a formal inventory, but we have, as part of the inventory and analysis, reached out to Fish and Wildlife and SHPO to determine if there are any threatened or endangered species or cultural resources in the database, and there were not. They also didn't list any suitable habitat or reference that any additional studies necessarily needed to be completed. It doesn't mean that we couldn't do further investigation around the habitat, engage a specialist, but that was their initial response to the review. Right, so I think we have consensus from this group at least on removing the splash pad and outdoor amphitheater classroom as having a positive impact on the park concept. The second question is, does an increased landscape buffer along Bowman Road improve this park concept as a community asset? So thoughts, this buffer was widened to 100 feet. Vegetated buffer between Bowman Road and any of the project amenities. Okay, buffer improves, opportunity to showcase natural environment, great comments. Increased buffer provides more separation for the property owners that own along Bowman. Yes, correct.
There was also a question about what the boardwalk is. The boardwalk is a raised wooden area that that does not affect any of the wetlands. So it's a raised area that doesn't impact wetland areas, and it would be wooden.
Although it does allow visitors to experience the natural environment and be very close to the natural environment, wetlands. So there would be an educational component about why wetlands are such critical environments. So we've had the parking question in the earlier meeting as well. We do use a parking metric of 60 spaces per field, and that accounts for the peak turnover times that we see. You know, when the fields are turning over, whether it's tournament or practice. There was also a question about traffic and a light on Chicken Plant Road. As you know, if there is a large increase in traffic volumes, the town can choose to do a traffic impact analysis to see if there's any off-site road improvements that would be required. That would be part of a future phase. All right. So the last question before we show you some of the precedent imagery, and I just a quick preview, some of the precedent imagery will also give you a nice visual on how to connect visitors with nature. So this park concept really focused on that separation between the active and the passive uses, making sure they're kind of two standalone parks almost to serve both of those juxtaposing needs. So the last question is, does the revised location of the dog park and playground improve the park concept as a community asset? So as a refresher, the dog park was moved more towards the interior there, right by the southern multi-purpose athletic field, by the parking. And the playground was moved towards the shelter up in between the two larger flex fields. Okay, so where the proposed dog park is, lots of trees and natural beauty. Might have to be cleared out and then would have to be flattened, possibly, although the good thing about dog parks is you can leave them relatively in their natural state. People love shade, and the pine trees also provide a really sustainable natural pine straw ground cover, which is nice for dog parks. So it could be considered a dog park that is a little bit more rustic versus one that focuses on clearing and flattening of the land. Seems small for dogs to play and run. So we like to see about an acre, and this one is a little bit smaller than that. That was intended to avoid the disc golf course. There is a possibility of relocating or reconfiguring the whole. We were trying to minimize the impacts. I think there is general consensus that a larger dog park would be more beneficial for the park, and our next phase is to take these comments into consideration and revise the concepts and refine them into one final concept. So I think there's opportunity to look at both the size and the location of the dog park.
Rachel, there was a question about the shelter in close proximity to the pond, about what it would look like. It would be generally a shelter that could potentially be rented out, but it would be an open air structure with picnic tables and just a generally covered area if you're out by the pond and it starts to rain, and just the opportunity to have a covered area within the interior of the site.
The pond does need additional evaluation. It's not in the best shape or condition, and it's does need a little bit more study. We have found, though, that people do love a view to the water. People love covered shelters, rentable spaces, something that frames a view to the water, and they have a sense of prospect and refuge being in an open natural setting like this.
Yeah, I think if the idea is to bring people out here to enjoy the natural beauty of the site, we have to offer a minimum amount of amenities for them to enjoy being at the facility in addition to the trails.
All right, well, let's keep moving forward and share some of our precedent imagery. If you want to talk through those, Julie.
Sure. This is just to give you a better idea of the vision that we have for the different amenities offered at the park. It gives you an idea of how the flex field works with a soccer field overlaid on the outfield of a baseball field, sort of the dog park with a more naturalistic feel that would fit into the rural character of the site. If you want to move to the next slide, we offer images of how the natural portion of the site could look with some nature-inspired play equipment that can just be sort of implemented into the existing site, nature trails, and then also swings and a small shelter that would, again, connect people to the water.
And before we move on to remaining questions or comments, just wanted to share a little bit about the next steps for the project. So again, we are going to take these comments into consideration and some additional feedback from other stakeholders and the village and develop a finalized concept. We, as part of that process, will be confirming all of the regulatory requirements, making sure that this project is not only buildable, but it's also permittable. We will be preparing a preliminary cost estimate to help Mark and his team project the financial demand and even some additional funding sources for the project. We will be finalizing a complete master plan document. So it is not just the two-dimensional plan that we're presenting. We do provide the village with a report that has a summary of all of our inventory and assessment findings, the community engagement process, and the vision for the park master plan. And then we'll be presenting the final version of this to council for adoption. So with that, we will open up the chat for any additional questions or comments. So if those folks monitoring the chat saw anything that we haven't addressed, please go ahead and indicate those, or if the attendees have anything else that they'd like to ask or share, please go ahead and do so at this time.
Rachel, I'll jump back to just a couple questions that I made note of as the chat was scrolling. I believe Carly had asked about the 2019 numbers for facility usage. We do not have that right now on our document that we're working off, but we can certainly get that. And if you have an email, I'd be happy to pass that along to you so that you could see that. The other questions were in regards to a traffic light possibly at Chicken Plant and Linden Road. And would there be any improvements along Chicken Plant Road? Because it is kind of a rough paved surface right now. And I think those are all things that we would have to take in consideration and talk with NCDOT about what our opportunities are. DOT usually likes to see traffic studies to see what the impact would be before they add new facilities such as a stoplight. But I think from the village standpoint, it's certainly something that we would be willing to do so that we could see if that is a possibility that DOT would be willing to work with us on. It is a state road. So they would ultimately have the call on that, and especially anything regarding repaving, we would have to coordinate with DOT on that.
We had
So-
a couple of questions coming in, one about accessible trails and another one about sidewalk from Linden Road to the park down Chicken Plant Road.
I can speak to the ADA accessibility piece. For the most part, we know that paved trails are considered ADA accessible, and because we want to do the right thing and meet local regulations, we try to provide ADA facilities in all parks. So there's opportunities for people of all ages and ability levels. There are some circumstances, usually depending on the regulatory agency reviewing the plan and the stormwater aspects of the project, who allow a certain size gravel with a certain degree of permeability to be used for trails. It's pretty specific, and again, just depends on the regulatory agency, but we are guaranteed for accessibility standards to be met with paved trails.
In terms of the sidewalk question from Linden down Chicken Plant Road, there is currently a connection shown in the village's pedestrian and bicycle master plans that would have a connection from Linden out to the site. So that is currently in the plan. And to Kim's question about public water and sewer finalized before fields are put into service, that would certainly be infrastructure, utilities. That would definitely be part of phase 1 development for the property before anything else is put out there. So that's certainly going to be a key piece to anything that goes out on the site.
Couple of follow-up thoughts. Wayman Woods is a model with good accessible trails. One felt the disc golf course was fantastic and one of the best in the area. And feedback on there being less athletic fields, big dog park area, and more walking trails.
And I'll touch on that one just real quick in terms of less athletic fields. You know, from a department, it's Dave and my job to advocate for the facilities that we need now and for the future. You know, this property was purchased 20 years ago with the idea in mind of, you know, westward development of the village and future needs that we would see for the community. Certainly, if we're lighting the field at Wicker Park, once the school site has removed the trailers, that gives us a field that we don't have currently that would be lit. So that would help some with the needs that we have in terms of removing a field and making the dog park bigger. I think that certainly can be part of the discussion. You know, what makes sense, what's going to meet the needs that the community has. So I think that's definitely something that we could look at.
Got some loud birds outside this evening. I don't know if anybody else can hear those, but
I hear them now.
yeah, talk about beautiful nature right outside here. Does anyone else have questions or comments that we haven't addressed? I should be at West Community Park right now. Yes, that would be lovely.
It would definitely be a nicer view than the office wall I'm staring at. And I'll just reference Jane's comment about that maybe this isn't the site for lit athletic fields. And if that's the case, if that's the direction that we choose to go, then I think it's incumbent on the village to identify other parcels of property where we could do that. Do we have existing sites that we could add lights to? Maybe that's an option. If not, then I think we're going to have to look at other parcels of land. And unfortunately, it's going to be on the perimeter of Pinehurst. There is nothing within the village limits that would be big enough that I'm aware of off the top of my head, for an athletic facility. So I think those are questions that staff and village council are going to have to address and see if there are alternatives if we do not develop this site for athletic use.
Well, big thank you to everyone who participated this evening. We really do take your comments into consideration. We want this to be a park for the community and by the community in the famous, phrase here. So it is really important that we hear your voice, and that is part of the built expression at the end of the day. So so the county doesn't get a skate park.
Lorenzo, you missed the earlier part of the discussion when I was talking about the skate park. What the village is going to do is talk to the Tri-Cities group, which is managers, council members of Pines Aberdeen. And because that group is in the process of looking for projects, can there be collaboration between towns to share the cost for facilities, maintenance of facilities versus everyone building their own parks, facilities, skate parks. So we think that that is a viable option that is worth exploring before Pinehurst decides to build one on its own. If Pinehurst does decide to build a skate park, we don't feel West Pinehurst is the appropriate location for that. We do also have property at Wicker Park where the inline skating rink is, where maybe there's an opportunity to expand that facility to include a skate park. North of the tennis courts in Wicker Park, there's also some additional land that would be large enough to do that. So there's opportunities out there. I don't think, obviously, the need for a skate park is going to go away. We just don't feel that West Pinehurst is the appropriate place for that. So we're going to explore that collaborative effort with the other towns, and hopefully that's going to lead to a facility for everyone.
All right, well, that ends our meeting for this evening. Again, thank you all so much for joining us, and be on the lookout. Mark, Dave, is there a place online on your community website where folks can see what the final adopted plan is, or what's the best opportunity for them to see the final output and what is ultimately adopted by council?
Yeah, once we have, the final concepts done and ready to present to council, we could put that on the website for everybody to see. Certainly, we can put it on social media. I'm not sure how long the Engage Pinehurst site would be live for this process, but we could certainly add it there as well. And Dave just posted the link for that. And, anytime that an item goes on the agenda for council consideration, there is a public opportunity to view that. You can come to meetings and provide comments there as well. So we would definitely put that out there so people can see it.
There was a question from one participant. Is there a survey to do again? We have closed the survey, and this is the second of 2 public input meetings. So the next opportunity to engage about the project is at the council meeting, but I'm sure that Dave or Mark would, I don't want to speak for you guys, but welcome any additional comments if you wanted to reach out to them directly, and they would be able to share those with us as we refine the master plan document.
And as Dave said, our contact information is on that site, and I just put my email there. If anyone wants to take note of that, feel free to reach out with any questions, and we'll be happy to follow up.
All right. Well, I hope everyone has a lovely evening. And
Carly, just real quick, our intent right now is to provide or present the final plan to council September 14th. We'll have to see how Rachel and her team, if that timeline is still appropriate based on the feedback and any changes they have to make. But right now, that is the anticipated date. If that changes, we would publicize that.
All right, well, we're going to close the meeting now. So I hope everyone has a wonderful evening. Thank you again and take care.
Thank you, everyone.